Okay, welcome everyone. We're doing the Monday homework sheet section for term 3, week 7. Let's start with question 1 where it says simplify this algebraic statement where we have to collect the like terms. So the first thing I'm going to do is circle the terms that have the alike pronumerals. I'm also going to circle the y terms so you can see that they're allowed to combine with each other. So when I combine the x terms, I've got 7x take away 3x, which is 4x. And when I consider the y terms and I collect them together, I've got 2y plus 7y, and that makes 9y. And that's a simple first answer. Hopefully you got that right. Question 2. I want you just to observe all the numbers now. So we're going to go 2 times 3, that's 6. And then 6 times 2 again, and that equals 12. So we're going to write down 12. Now have a look now at the algebraic part. There's an x times another x times a y. If you just look at the x times x, that turns into x squared, and the y by itself is like that, just a y, so the answer is 12x squared y. We're up to question 3, which is a simplified question. I always say, if you can, write the x squareds as xx, and that makes it a bit easier to see for some people what's allowed to be cancelled out. So I'm now going to see, is there any pronumerals on the top and the bottom which can be cancelled out, and the x can. Now the x and the y, we have an x on the top and a y on the bottom. Are there any numbers that go into 8 and also go into 6? You might have picked that 2 goes in 4 times on the top, 3 times on the bottom. So when I put it all together, I've got a fraction with a 4 on the top and this little x also on the top. And I've got a y on the bottom with a 3. So I write 3y, and that is the simplified answer. Question 4. There's a hint below which will be pretty helpful, so you might want to pause and try that. Remember, the 6 out the front is going to multiply by both the terms in the brackets. We call it a distribution of the 6 by multiplying. So 6 times m is 6m. And then look at the 6 times 2, that's obviously 12, and there's a minus between them. So we write minus 12. Question 5, similar to the next one, we're going to multiply. We're going to distribute the 7a being multiplied over the 2 terms. So I think 7a times 2, or 7 times 2 equals 14. Then there's an a there. Then we're doing the second term in the brackets multiplied by the front term. So 7 times 3 equals 21. Then it's a times a. Any number multiplied by itself is squared. Think about what goes in the middle, a plus or a minus. The answer is a plus. And that's the answer. Question 6. Question 6 is identical to the ones above, it's just that there's 2 different sections to it. So we're going to go 3 times y and 3 times 4. So I'm going to write that down. I get 3 times y is 3y. And then 3 times 4 is 12, so I've plussed that. Now look at the second section. I'm going to go 4 times 2x, well that would be 8x. And then 4 times 3, that would be minus this time with a 12. Now the next step is to collect anything that might be similar. Now there's a y and there's an x. They're not similar, so they can't be collected. But there is a 12 plus 12 and a minus 12. Have a think about what's plus 12, take away 12. Or what's positive 12, take away 12. And the answer is they equal 0. So I'm not going to write a number in the answer, but I am going to write 3y plus 8x, and remember it doesn't matter which order you write that in, you could have written 8x plus 3y, and that's also correct. Okay, question 7 we're up to, where it says we have to factorise, and the hint says we have to look for the highest common factor and write the highest common factor at the front and then fill in the brackets. And there's an example you could have a quick look at just over here. I'm looking for what's a factor that goes into 8x but also goes into 16. Some of you might choose 2, but there's one higher. Some of you might choose 4, but there's a higher factor again. In fact, the highest factor that's common is 8. Now then I'm going to write a bracket and put in 2 terms between a positive symbol here, plus symbol. I'm going to say if the 8 was multiplied to get 8x, what would the other term need to be? And it's clearly just a little x. And what would you multiply by 8 to end up with the 16 at the end? Or 8 times 2. And if you just make that link and you check, 8 times x is 8x, 8 times 2 is 16, then that's correct. Here it's the same question, it's just a little bit more difficult. So we're going to write a number, then a brackets, and then a plus out in the middle there. So I'm looking for a common number, 4 and 6. Well, the common number there is obviously 2. But I want you to notice the hint says there's more than one common factor, a number and a pronumeral. So you might just notice there's an M in both of them. So I'm going to write that little common M at the front. So remember, this thing at the front is called the highest common factor, and it involves a number this time and a pronumeral. So what needs to go in the first bracket space? Well, 2m times what equals 4m? Well, the answer to that's 2. What needs to go in the second bracket space? Well, 2m times what gives 6mn? I reckon the number has to be a 3 because we have to get a 6. And the only thing missing is that little n letter. Now you can just check, does that combined when you multiply equal 6mn? And yes, it does. So let's move on. Okay, we're up to the section on equations, and it says, is the following a true or false equation? 8a divided by 2 has to equal 12 if a is 3. So I want you to check, what's 8 times 3? So we've replaced that a with a 3. 8 times 3 is 24, and then we have to divide that by 2. And 24 divided by 2 equals 12, which happens to be, this one, the answer. So that's actually a true equation, so we're just going to write true. Solve the equation by observation. That means have a look at that using numeracy skills and see if you can figure out the answer. You might say, okay, what plus 1 has to equal the 25? Well, 24 has to be in that space because 24 plus 1 is 25. So the 8x has to be 24. So you're saying, okay, 8 times what is 24? And if you know your times tables, it's a 3. In question 11, we're going to use inverse or opposite operations twice because it's a two-step equation to try and isolate the pronumeral. So the inverse of minus 1, the opposite of minus 1 is plus 1. So I'm writing that just underneath the 1. But if I do it on the left of an equation, I have to do it on the right to keep it in balance. When you see inverses or opposite operations, you can cross them off because negative 1 and plus 1 combined equal nothing. So that means on the left-hand side I've got 3x and no number, and on the right-hand side I've got 14 and 1, which makes 15. Now you might now realise that 3 times what is 15, and the answer is that the x has to be a 5. Now before I do question 12, I'm going to look at it and it says expand the brackets first. 4 times x is 4x. 4 times 2 equals 8 with a minus in between, and that has to equal 32. And now pause it there and see if you can find the x or solve the rest of the equation. If you're back, I'm going to do the opposite of minus 8, which is plus 8, and do that on both sides as you have to with equations. That leaves me with 4x equals 40. So that means x equals 10. Okay, we're up to number 13. This is a bit harder now. So when we look at this, we realise we want to isolate the x eventually and end up with x equals some number. So that's what we're going to figure out. So to do so, you'll notice we've got x on both sides of the equation, and that's a problem. We need to make one of the sets of x's disappear. So I'm going to make this first one, the second one disappear on the right, because I'm saying what's the opposite of 3x? Now think of it as a positive 3x, and so the opposite would be actually minusing a 3x. I'm going to write that on both sides and line it up so the like terms are just underneath each other. Remember, when you've got opposites, you can cross them out. So look at this portion with the x now. We've got 7x, take 3x is 4x. We've got a plus 4, which we haven't done anything with yet. And on the right-hand side, we've got this minus 16. Now it becomes an equation like the earlier ones. So I'm going to next try and get rid of that plus 4 by doing its opposite. Remember, whenever you do something, you do it on both sides of an equation. But whenever you see opposites, you can cross them out. So now I've got 4x on the left, no number, and tricky one here, negative 16, take away 4. Some of you are going to say that's 12, but that's not quite right. Imagine you're at negative 16 on like a number line. You're down here, and you have to go 4 to the left. Where do you end up at? Well, you end up at negative 20. So this one has to be minus 20. Now 4 times what is negative 20? Most of you would agree that 4 times 5 is 20. So 4 times what is negative 20? Well, the answer is negative 5, because a positive times a negative gives a negative. That's correct for that one. Now we're up to number 14. Okay, we're up to question 14, where the question says we have to solve a simple equation x squared equals 36. Most of you might obviously see the answer and think what squared equals 36, and I think most of you will come up with that and you'll say, well, squared means timesing by itself, so the number that you multiply by itself is 6, because 6 times 6 is 36. But the hint says x squared equations have two answers. That's because when you multiply a negative by itself, and you do say negative 6 times negative 6, you end up with positive 36. So in fact, which number squared gives 36? It's actually both. So there's two answers to that question. Now we're up to the final question for Monday, which is number 15. Find the value of x and y in the rectangle using equation techniques. Now the important piece of information is it says it's a rectangle, which means the sides opposite each other are equal to one another. So if I look at the side up the top, I know that the 3x plus the 2 has to equal the 5x minus the 10. And that's like an equation which we did earlier in the questions. So for this one, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to get rid of the, let's say, the 3x. So the opposite of 3x is minus 3x. Do that on both sides. And when you see opposites, you cross it out. Now that leaves me with 2 on the left. Now looking at the x terms, I've got 5x take 3x is 2x and a minus 10. The next thing I'm going to get rid of is that minus 10. So the opposite of minus 10 is plus 10. Crossing it out, but not forgetting to do it on the other side as well, which I nearly did. So now I've got on the left, I've got 12 equals 2x, and you might be able to figure that one out, that the missing number is x has to be 6. Now look at the ones across, they also have to be equal. So I'm going to write down 3y minus 17, that has to equal y plus 3. So I'm going to get rid of that little 1y that's sitting there. The opposite of a positive 1y is a minus 1y. I write it on both sides and cross off the opposites. That leaves me with 2y minus 17 equals 3. Now I'm running out of room, so I'll do it over here. My next stage would probably be to say let's plus 17 on both sides and cross off the opposites. So I've got now 2y on the left and 20 on the right. Now you might guess 2 times what is 20, and the answer is y equals 10. So there's two answers for that section. The x equals 6 and the y equals 10. That's the end of the Monday section, so I hope you went okay with it.